explosive devices. Can you give us a sense of the work your teams carry out in Gaza and elsewhere?
Thanks very much for having me on. Yes, we've been operating in Gaza for most of this year, doing explosive hazard assessments, which is something that we've done around the world for more than 30 years. Halo is probably most famous for when Diana, Princess of Wales, walked in a minefield in Angola in 1997 that was being cleared by Halo staff. But we've always worked not just with mines, but with explosives. And currently we're working in Syria, where it's very much an urban problem that we're dealing with, as well as a rural issue. We've also cleared cities in Libya, cities in Iraq, and we're currently working in Taiz in Yemen. So we've got quite a lot of experience in working in these kinds of environments where we use sort of sophisticated equipment to unearth buried explosives from rubble and from pancaked buildings in order to allow reconstruction to take place. The difficulty in the Gaza Strip is the scale. The UN has assessed that perhaps 78% of buildings in Gaza have been either completely demolished or severely destroyed and damaged in the last 2 years. And that kind of density of population combined with that level of destruction is going to make it a really complicated operating environment. Where we're working in Syria, there's more space. If we come across a rocket and we need to destroy it in a controlled demolition, then we can set up a cordon around that rocket and around a village, keep all the people at a safe distance and blow it up. That's going to be much more complicated to achieve in Gaza.
And you just mentioned there, the UN has estimated that around 80% of buildings have been damaged or destroyed in Gaza. And there's more than 7,500 tons of unexploded bombs believed to be deep in that rubble. How difficult and how dangerous is this going to be for your teams from the Halo Trust on the ground to try and help up with this cleanup operation? And how many people are you hoping to send?
So the complexity operates at a number of different levels. One is the environment that we're working in. As I said, it's very densely populated. There's so much rubble, and there will also be complicating factors such as the presence of asbestos or other toxic chemicals in the rubble. And of course, sadly, human remains in the rubble. And so we would expect to have to work with imams and other religious figures to ensure that the human remains are treated with respect. Then there are the kind of technical explosive issues that we would imagine we have to deal with. And we'll be dealing with some highly sophisticated, modern and quite expensive munitions dropped by one side. And then in some contrast, the other side will have been improvised improvised rockets and explosive landmine equivalents, for which there are no manuals because they're almost homemade, and dealing with them can be just as dangerous. But as I said, we have got 3 decades worth of experience in dealing with this. One of the things that we specialize in is repurposing the kind of heavy machinery used in the construction and demolition industry, armoring it up and combining that with bomb disposal experts to kind of essentially rake through and clear through rubble, to do so in a way that is safe for people surrounding them and for our own operatives. We expect to have about 50 teams doing this, maybe 2 international bomb disposal experts and a number of assistants working in close partnership with the reconstruction efforts for several years. Possibly, I think the Arab peace planning released a few months ago talked about 5 years of reconstruction in Gaza. So that certainly could be the time period when we're looking at our most intense work there.
And we have seen pictures of people in Gaza making the journey across the strip to their homes in the north following the ceasefire that was announced. Can you just let us have an idea of how safe it is for them in this urban terrain? Like you said, it's very built up and it's very difficult places for you to operate.
So there have already been reports. I saw reports yesterday that some children had been injured having come across some explosive material, and clearly there's inadequate monitoring and reporting at the moment, given that there's not a great deal of stability. what we find, and it's a paradox of peace, really, and that we found this in Afghanistan in 2021 when the Taliban took over and the fighting ended. We found it in Syria at the beginning of this year when, following the fall of the Assad regime, people want to return home and they want to rebuild quickly. And we find people taking matters into their own hands. I've seen piles of explosives that have been moved by farmers in Syria who wanted to farm their fields, get their spring planting in. And so they've moved devices which weren't safe to move because they wanted them out of the way. And we've come across communities where people perhaps deposit cluster bombs and unexploded shells into wells because they think the water will make them safe and somehow kind of degrade their capacity to explode. So there's quite a lot of urgency about this. The sooner there is stability that allows our teams to get in on the ground and start to work with the construction efforts, the safer people will be, because as I say, people are desperate to get rebuilt. They're desperate to get their lives back together, to go back to their homes and start to sort through the rubble. And the sooner we're able to accompany them and accompany the reconstruction efforts, the more lives and injured people we can save.
Yes, absolutely. And those pictures of people wanting to go back home just shows the desperation to go back to what you know. You mentioned 5 years there to me a little bit earlier, but looking into the future and realistically, how long is it going to be until Gaza is safe and rebuilt?
I think we probably would have to look at it in a couple of phases. And the first may be that 5-year, quite ambitious plan for reconstruction where there's active, building work going on a very large scale. Then you're looking at a second phase where you would have a residual bomb disposal capacity, very similar, in fact, to the way some countries in Western Europe do. Some of the German states have an annual budget of around 20 million euros to deal with unexploded munitions from the Second World War. So 80 years later, there is still a need for bomb disposal experts who are called out when people are doing construction work or farmers in fields come across things. And I suspect that in Gaza, that kind of residual bomb disposal capacity is going to be required for many, many decades to come, as things that were dropped now are unearthed a long time into the future.
Paul McCann, it was fascinating speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.